Most website owners don't fully understand what ADA compliance for websites means. And because they don't know how to make their website ADA compliant, it leads to bad decisions. It leads to purchasing unnecessary products and services. And in some cases, it leads to more lawsuits. So in today's video, we're going to talk about the law, we're going to talk about accessibility, and then we're going to finish up with next steps on how to actually make your website ADA compliant and reduce risk of litigation. Let's first start off with the law. So the ADA stands for the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we are looking to Title III of the ADA because Title III applies to places of public accommodation. The ADA Title III is very helpful in that it provides 12 categories and multiple examples within those categories of different entities that may be considered places of public accommodation. Examples include doctors' offices, retailers, hotels, gyms, theaters, and the list goes on, and even within the list, it's non-exhaustive. I will provide a companion article to this video in the description, and then you can go and look at that article and find all of the different examples. But now, back to places of public accommodation. There is a general prohibition against discrimination of people with disabilities. There is also a section in Title III of the ADA that states that we can't treat people differently because of the absence of auxiliary aids. So we can't treat people with disabilities differently because we have not provided auxiliary aids. And then in the regulation for Title III, it states that we must furnish aids to ensure effective communication. Sometimes courts have interpreted the ADA to apply to websites, and websites are considered that place of public accommodation. Other times, they have not interpreted the ADA that way. Other times, it has been that the website is an auxiliary aid. So the website is an auxiliary aid of what is a physical location. So let's say we have a brick and mortar store, and then we have the website, and if that website isn't accessible, then the website is not ensuring effective communication, and so therefore plaintiffs' lawyers will allege that that is a violation of the ADA. So that's why I mentioned both of those requirements from Title III. But the important thing to know is that the ADA has largely been interpreted to apply to websites. Now, let's go to the DOJ. The DOJ is the Department of Justice, and the DOJ is the regulatory and enforcement agency behind Title II and Title III of the ADA. Why is that so important? Because the DOJ can create regulations which have the effect of law. The DOJ can also enforce the ADA. And we have seen the DOJ at times in past years enforce the ADA with private enforcement actions. And those private enforcement actions have inevitably led to settlements. And where those settlements are particularly helpful to us is they have laid out the DOJ's thoughts. We know what the DOJ has required of these different entities involving digital accessibility. So sometimes this was a website, sometimes this was a mobile app, other times it was different types of content. But when we look at the patterns of what the DOJ has mandated in these settlements, we know what best practices for ADA compliance is. But here's the other important part. We don't have official regulation yet. It is coming, but we don't have it yet. But the good news is we know exactly what to do for best practices because, again, we look to the DOJ, we look to their settlements resulting from private enforcement actions, and in those settlements, ultimately, the requirements come down to two things: WCAG conformance and posting a conspicuous accessibility statement. Now, it's not that we have to have perfect WCAG conformance. And what does WCAG mean? Well, that's an acronym for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and those are technical standards for accessibility. They're not the law, but they are technical standards. And so what the DOJ is doing in their private enforcement actions and their settlements is saying, we need you to meet these technical standards so that we can consider you in compliance. So importantly, though, remember, the DOJ doesn't have a regulation yet, so they're taking enforcement despite the fact that there's not a formal legal precedent for modern digital technology. But the DOJ has stated that the ADA does apply to websites and mobile apps, but that places of public accommodation have flexibility in how they comply with the ADA so long as they do. But as you can imagine, that's problematic because website owners are looking for guidance on exactly what they need to do to be considered, to have their website be considered ADA compliant. Now, the actual legal standard for ADA compliance is meaningful access. So there's the meaningful access standard, but again, we get back to this question, what exactly makes a website meaningfully accessible? When have we reached this meaningful access threshold? So again, website owners are trying to figure out what they need to do. And let's go back here to a few things. One, who is exempt from the Americans with Disabilities Act? Well, we know specifically that private clubs and religious organizations are exempt from ADA Title III compliance. But with private clubs, just because you have a membership or just because there's a subscription, it doesn't mean that you are considered a private club. So you have to figure out whether or not you are actually considered a private club under Title III. Let me give you an example. Costco Warehouse, they charge memberships every year, but they wouldn't be considered a private club. They would be considered a place of public accommodation. So we have this general stance from the DOJ that the ADA does apply. We have the meaningful access standard, but the problem is that website owners want to know exactly what to do. And why do they want to know exactly what to do? Well, because the legal landscape is such that plaintiffs' lawyers are continuing to file complaints and send demand letters over website accessibility. And as it stands, there are about 25 active to fairly active plaintiffs' lawyers in this space. And that number is growing. And that is something I have seen recently where we've seen more and more plaintiffs' lawyers enter the field. And there are about 15 accessibility issues that are commonly claimed. And these accessibility issues are claimed over and over again. And most website owners, when they are sued, they are only vaguely aware of ADA compliance for websites, or they're not aware of it at all. Most of the litigation takes place in New York, California, and Florida. And the settlements range typically between $5,000 and $20,000. Of course, it can be less. Of course, it can be more. But that's where the settlements typically lie. And this can get very expensive for website owners, especially because it's very possible, and it happens fairly often, that website owners are sued multiple times. So this is something of really significant concern for many website owners. Now, I've talked about WCAG. I've talked about website owners not knowing exactly what to do. The important thing to know about WCAG is, again, it's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are technical standards. They are frequently referenced, but they are never the law. So they're never the law, even if they're incorporated into the law. And let me give you an example. Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act applies to governmental entities, and it actually incorporates formally the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So while the guidelines may be incorporated into the law, they are not the law, but they are frequently referenced. And again, going back to the DOJ in their private enforcement actions has mandated WCAG conformance. So that is a best practice, but when we actually look to the technical standards and we look at a website, it can sometimes be difficult or take a while to be fully WCAG conformant. So keep that in mind, and I will talk more about that in a second. Now, there are different versions of WCAG, and the most recent version is WCAG 2.2, and that came out in the fall of 2023. What WCAG conformance does, what this is all about, is making sure that people with disabilities have access. And so WCAG conformance really optimizes your website so that it does ensure access to people with disabilities. And by the way, we're talking about different disabilities and ranges of disabilities. It's not, people typically think of ADA website compliance as we're making our website accessible to blind or visually impaired users. And that isn't the only group of people that we are making our website accessible for. So we're also making a website for people who have hearing disabilities or hearing impairments, motor impairments, cognitive impairments, and learning disabilities. These are all the different types of disabilities that we want to consider when we are making our website accessible. So now let's get to more of the practical side of this, what to do. What are the next best steps? Well, many people, when they search for ADA compliance, they find that they come across overlay widgets. And so overlay widgets present themselves as solutions to ADA compliance. They present themselves as making your website accessible, and that's not the case. Overlay widgets don't make your website accessible. What they do, they provide a menu of settings that someone could potentially adjust to render superficial adjustments on your website. But those superficial adjustments don't make your website accessible at all, because to make your website accessible, you must make it fundamentally accessible. So you don't enable accessibility, you don't turn on accessibility, your website is accessible. So we need to make sure that our code and our content is accessible. So our code is our code, but we also need to ensure that we take our content, so our text, our images, our video, our audio, etc. We need to make sure that our content is accessible, but then we also need to make sure that our website is coded correctly. So those are the two things that we need to do, and overlay widgets don't do that. What they do is they use JavaScript to apply superficial changes that there can be some nominal benefit to, but it's nothing that would actually make your website accessible. Now, there are also scans. Many people refer to scans as ADA compliance checkers. Scans are very helpful tools, but they are limited tools. So we can use them to help find accessibility issues, but we have to know that scans are they're only based in automation. They're only based on rule sets that look through your code, and accessibility is much more than that. So we can use scans to help guide our efforts to get a feel for the overall accessibility of a website, but scans are non-conclusive. They might not flag an issue. They might not know an issue still exists because, again, they're only using automated rule sets, and we need scans to work intelligently, and scans are very limited in that. So helpful, but limited, and by no means conclusive. People think they are ADA compliance checkers. They are not ADA compliance checkers whatsoever. Okay, and then there are also custom overlays. So I said you can't enable accessibility, and this is because you don't want someone to turn on accessibility. Now, custom overlays are better than overlay widgets in general because they are specific to a website. So what is happening is there is JavaScript, it is applied to a website, and when enabled, it will make fixes specific to that website. But these are problematic for a number of reasons, including the fact that someone has to activate or know to activate these custom overlays. And of course, that's also a problem with overlay widgets. But when we get into widgets and we get into activating accessibility, then we have a separate but equal problem on our hands. And then we also have the problem that overlays aren't going to make a website fully accessible. There are things that overlays miss. So I hope the important takeaway here is that overlays, whether they're custom or whether they are just a widget, a menu of settings, neither of them are sufficient to make a website ADA compliant. All right, so now let's get into the practical next steps. So the traditional route is an audit and remediation. And an audit remediation are highly recommended because what an audit is going to do is it's going to find all of the accessibility issues on your website, and then you're going to have a report on all of those issues. And then you have something that a developer, a content manager, a designer can work from to remediate or fix those issues. So that's why an audit and remediation are so important, because we are fundamentally making sure that our code and our content are accessible. There's also user testing. So many people conflate the terms audit and user testing. An audit is where you have an accessibility expert that is grading your website against the web content accessibility guidelines and then reporting on any issues where they are non-conformant. With user testing, this is more of a practical exercise where you have a professional with one or more disabilities, typically using assistive technology, and they are going through your website and they are relating any accessibility issues that they come across during their experience. So they are different, but in combination, they are extremely helpful. The chronological order you want to take is you want to have an audit, then remediation, and then user testing, because with user testing, you really don't want to be initially working through issues that you could have caught through an audit. So it's very important that you take that chronological order. And then it's also very important that as you are remediating, you are prioritizing the issues that plaintiffs' lawyers commonly look for. Now again, remember what I said, there are 15 issues that are most commonly claimed in litigation. So we need to work through these most commonly claimed issues, because those are the issues that lead to litigation. And of course, while we're working on accessibility, we don't want to get sued. So you need to be concerned with these 15 issues first. And by the way, when it comes to the web content accessibility guidelines, WCAG 2.1 conformance level AA has 50 considerations or 50 success criteria that we need to account for. But importantly, plaintiffs' lawyers are looking for the same 15 issues over and over again. Now, these issues aren't necessarily a one-to-one with the success criteria, and that's a very nuanced point, but it is an important distinction. So just because there's an accessibility issue doesn't mean it's necessarily a WCAG success criterion, but it's almost always going to be related. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes plaintiffs' lawyers will have an accessibility issues that aren't even, they'll claim an accessibility issue that's not even required in the web content accessibility guidelines. But what's important is that we know what these issues are, so that way we can resolve them first, make our website unappealing to plaintiffs' lawyers, and then work towards best practices for our ADA compliance. And so that would be, again, WCAG conformance and posting an accessibility statement. Once we get there, we are going to be in really good shape, but it does take a while to make a website fully accessible. And because it does, it can take weeks, or it can take months, or it can take several months. So we might be looking at 3 weeks if we're on the quick side. We might be looking at 3 months, and it's going to depend on the number of accessibility issues. It might depend on the size of the website. It might depend on the complexity of the website. And it's also going to depend on how proactive you are with your website. in how many resources you have available. If you have a developer and you have a content manager who are ready to get started, we can get this done in maybe several days, right? So it really depends on how proactive you are about this. But the point is that while we're working on accessibility, why not improve the accessibility of the website while we work through these most commonly claimed issues so that we reduce our risk of litigation as we go? And so that is the appropriate approach. So you want to find the issues on your website, you want to audit, and then you want to remediate. That is the best course of action. And then it's always good if you can top things off with user testing. But while with that audit, you want to have a prioritization of the accessibility issues so that you can take care of those first during remediation. And so this leads me to my two websites, accessible.org and adacompliance.net. With accessible.org, I offer these audit, remediation, and user testing services. There is also support available. With adacompliance.net, I offer training programs. These are on demand, and these will help you, especially the ADA compliance course. The ADA compliance course will take you through these 15 issues and tell you exactly how to find and how to fix these issues and how to prioritize them, right? Because even though there are 15 issues, some issues come up more times than others. And so even in the lessons, I've ordered those issues in the order in which I would take these top 15 issues that are most commonly claimed. And then there is also training for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines so that your team can start to develop expertise and knowledge and experience in accessibility and work through accessibility. And that way you don't have to continually outsource services. But this is ADA compliance for websites. This is a comprehensive guide as the legal and practical landscape stand now. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or reach out to me, and I will be happy to go.